as smoothly as possible. Um, these are some. So my name is Georgie, or Georgiana Pongyesva, and I am half Hopi, born for rabbit and tobacco, and reside in the from the village of Holtvilla. I also grew up half Bahana, so I have a very unique perspective on both worlds. Kind of grew up between the two. And so it's been an interesting experience just understanding my own personal identity and going into work with cultural resource management and just kind of navigating with the narratives that we are given and between the two worlds that I was born into. So this is kind of based on my perspectives and my experiences moving through uh, the narratives that were fed in through the national narrative. So let me see if I can. I can't see myself speaking. It's kind of thrown me. Okay.
Your slide's up though. It looks perfect.
This is kind of a weird layout. Okay. It's just thrown me off a little. Okay. So slide 2, I think. Okay. So as I said, I was born into two conflicting worlds. My dad is a traditional Hopi farmer from Holtvilla, born and raised, and continues to practice and continues to farm. And I was raised with that traditional perspective on Hopi lifeways and culture and spirituality and that relationship that we have to our food, to the land, and to that holistic view of our existence. And my mother is originally from Santa Monica, California, and I grew up born and raised in Oak Creek Canyon near Sedona, Arizona. So spring in the spring waters down here. So springs have always been a part of my life, but it's been that dichotomy that has been a very unique experience and kind of hard to navigate. Because you just don't feel like you ever fit in either world. That's how it was for me. Like in this slide, nature was kind of always the common place where I felt okay and safe, and the bridge between worlds, I would say. So that is why I do this work. I really usually have a hard time displaying my accolades or the work that I've done. You can ask anyone who's tried to get a bio out of me that it's like pulling teeth. But for the purpose of this presentation, I think it is really necessary to include, to see the whole perspective and how I got to this place of understanding, and hopefully that we can start changing the narrative moving forward with archaeology, because for us as Indigenous people and Native people, it perpetuates the trauma, and we're continuing these old practices that are outdated and honestly missing a huge portion of the puzzle if you're trying to get the whole perspective. It's based a lot off of false narratives that were created by, people that we weren't represented. And that's where we're trying to change that now. So in this presentation, you're going to kind of see a little bit of my background, and then we'll kind of go into some of the stuff that it took my lifetime of learning to figure out, and I didn't have access to, and I don't know where any normal person would have access to if you did not grow up or know a Native person or go to school for Native studies. So I hope that this gives a new perspective to people, and we can start thinking about these landscapes, archaeology, preservation, museums, all differently. It's trying to change the narrative and totally tear down those old ways of thinking and start changing them, because it's about time. So that being said, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where we're from, right? So for me, let's see if I can go next slide. Oh, okay. So this is kind of, so growing up between worlds, it was a very confusing experience. Like, I knew I was Hopi, I knew I was Wimpia, like I was initiated as a part of that world, but also part of this world. And then there was the California world. So it was all very, very interesting. And so my early years, we went to Waldorf school, which was like kind of creative, colorful, very close to nature, and open. Like, I think every child should do that kind of, creating imagination. And then St. Mary's Catholic School, which is very Catholic, and you're like, okay, this kind of coincides with what I've always been taught. But and then public school, which that's where I think was my first introduction to anything with Native people, or Native, just like a paragraph basically on the Trail of Tears. And it just tells you, oh, all the Cherokee just disappeared, and that happened. You get maybe a chapter if you're lucky. And then that's that. All Native people vanished. So it was always a very like weird thing for me to be like, wait, I'm here. And I know we have like our Navajo, like I went to school with other tribes, but when what you're being taught and fed is a completely different narrative. So it's a very confusing identity crisis. That's how I felt, at least. And then so when I got to college at the Coconino Community College, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I took everything. So I took physical anthropology, environmental science, and psychology, sociology, all the above. And the whole concept of science was very interesting to me because I always grew up observing the natural world and processes, but putting everything in categories and having to test, hypothesize off these natural processes, and having it was off for me. And physical anthropology was very interesting. It was, the craniology studies and just like all of that. It just, I don't know. I didn't really realize what that context was at the time until later, but it was a very interesting experience. But through that, I found history. And then I went to Fort Lewis, and that changed my life forever. Because it wasn't until I got to Fort Lewis that I even had an idea. Like, I had one professor, I have to shout out to Dr. G, because without him, if I hadn't walked into that history of Southwest Studies class, and he hadn't been like, go take another Native Studies class and I'll be your counselor, because I had no guidance or anything, then I have no idea where I would be right now. I'd probably be miserable studying European history in Europe or something. But the experience that I had through that guidance led me to this whole world that totally changed my perspective, and was also very different even within departments of the school. So I think, that being said, that led me, into, so I found public history. Public history was a whole new world. I'm like, what applied history? You can do this. And then created, the space of understanding through, and then archaeology. I did field school. That was a whole nother experience. Native studies and native preservation classes, heritage preservation classes, versus American history could have been totally opposite, like narratives. It was, and I took them at the same time. It was a very interesting experience. And through that, like for instance, with the archaeology field school, I realized that there is no communication between departments. And I had actually went to go talk to both heads of the departments, and the Native Studies department had been trying for years, and archaeology just like totally brushed it off. Like, it was, they wanted nothing to do with the idea of including living descendants in the practices of that, like as far as like the curriculum and all of that at the time. I did have a few Native students, including myself, in our field school, but then there was a lot of issues that came out of that. So through these lived experiences, that's how I have formed these what I'm about to share with you now. So that was lost in translation. It was through that experience, through Fort Lewis, through going and taking Native studies, that I finally got a broader, holistic picture of even our history as Native people within the United States and all over the world. But what they feed you is that we all disappeared. I usually have a map, and my first slide is we're still here. There's 574, I believe, and rising federally recognized tribes. There's state recognized tribes. There's unrecognized tribes, and we're all still here. But try to find a map on that, and it's almost impossible. You can't find. It's very, very hard to find a map of those original lands or any tribes, because this is the national narrative that they have purposely set for us. So after all those experiences in college and learning, like, I did museums, I did archives, I did archaeology, and all of them fit together. I was trying to get a well-rounded view of everything so I could do whatever I could to help my tribe and get these perspectives across. And everything for me is always about the environment. So upon that, finding my way home, I think of it as finding my way home because I was raised in this world. That's what, my dad always used to say, we were raised in this world, but we have to find our way home. And I found my way home to Hopi. And it was through these experiences, because I was like, what can I do? I've never fit in. I've never felt comfortable in each, but I can maybe be this bridge. I can be this bridge between the two worlds with the experience that I have. So when I came back to Hopi, I just tried to do everything I could to get involved. And my dad introduced me to Lee Kuan Waisima, who was the old director and started the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office. And I had learned about the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office in school in Dr. G's classes. And I couldn't believe it was my tribe and they were leading the way. And I was so excited. I really just wanted to work for CPO. So I started trying to get involved however I could. And eventually they gave me a job as a research assistant, and it was a dream come true. That's where I worked on various projects. I always appreciate, my forever CPO family and all the cultural advisors that I got to work with that are here and have passed, and the experience that they shared and just taught me, I'll take with me forever. So that really laid the foundation of my understanding of so I first got hired under a NAGPRA grant, working with 5 major museums on the repatriation of sacred objects for Hopi. And Hopi has collections all over the world. These are 5 huge, pretty big collections. The American Museum of Natural History has a huge collection. But what is a priority for repatriation? And for instance, there's a whole lot that goes into that. And I learned that experience through that, and from land management to public lands and the perceptions that on wilderness or management, it's all across the board the same. Archaeology, it's this idea that we were removed from land states or public lands in order to create them. We were removed from the narrative in order to preserve our past and preserve the disappearing races that we are, in order to justify conquest and the taking of the land. So that's the reality of what it is. And you don't know that. I mean, you're fed. I had an identity crisis. I had no idea. I had to find that way, and it wasn't easy. So I hope through this presentation, we can get a better understanding that it's not just about material culture. And that is the biggest thing. When I was in field school in archaeology and in archaeology classes, 101, all the things, I never understood like basket maker 1, basket maker 2, all that stuff. I get it. It's all based on material culture, but as Hopi, we know through the migrations, through all of that, why these things are. So that was always a very confusing thing to me. And I was like, okay, but they're telling me, and that's academia, so they must be right, right? And that's the thing where we need to stop. I think now we need to start questioning, because what I learned working with the Cultural Preservation Office and then afterwards now, these are just some pictures from the experiences, like worked on Bears Ears, from archives, land, speaker on the rivers, connecting watersheds, reservoirs. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so much to it, and it's so much more than just material culture. And I think we really need to start thinking outside the box, because in archaeology, when I went to field school, I was like sketching all the walls and stuff, and we did it at Petrified Forest. And I started like sketching the plants, because for me, I'm obsessed. I love plants. And that's always been a huge part of my life. Oh wait, sorry. Let's go back to this one. I'm just my life with growing up with this Hopi perspective. It's about the birds, it's about the plants, it's about the pollinators, and all of the holistic perspectives on landscape, not just about material. So, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we have this goes right. And so a lot in these landscapes, often with archaeology, it's isolated occurrences, or the Anasazi, why did they leave? It's these hypotheses that are made out of total, for me, it seemed like nowhere, but I was like, wait, we know, we're right here. Why aren't we involved, or why aren't we asked? And then when bringing these subjects up, often it's silenced or pushed under the rug, because it's just been that way for so long. And sometimes it's really hard to speak up against the powers that be, or the colonial institutions that have put these things in place for so long. So for me, when I was a little kid in California, I remember finding an arrowhead at Pfeiffer Beach with my parents. And my dad, he told me to put it back. It's a respect. We leave it. We don't mess around with those things. We leave that because we know these are living things. These are living, and we don't want to take anything home with us. So that is often that disconnect, or that double-edged sword that we have to walk, right? In this world, we have to walk this double-edged swords of respect, reciprocity, and the understandings of stewardship and balance that we have as Native people, against this life, this modern world that is all about what I always like to say is worshiping at the altar of consumption and convenience. And we value material culture. It's very hard to work in spaces like that, because, I mean, why aren't we valuing water or trees or things that give us life, rather than the things that, it's only okay as long as a man has manipulated it, and then it's valuable. So the first full circle aspect of my life came from after all of that. In college, I was like, you can be a speaker on river trips. Like, that was a dream come true for me. I always had a dream of doing that with Grand Canyon and speaking. But then, for Hopi, that's a taboo for Hopi women to go down the Grand Canyon. So this is the constant battle that we have to face living in these two worlds. Because for me, like, that was a dream come true. I felt like I had to do that, because if I didn't do it, no one's going to speak for the environment. No one's going to speak for the water. No one's going to go and do that. So it's those sacrifices that we make. For me, I don't have children. I don't have, this is my life, is educating on holistic understandings of landscapes and water and sky, dark sky, all of it. Because if we don't speak for them, no one will. And we have to, those are my children. That's what I see. What I've seen in my lifetime is terrifying. It is very scary to see what the future is going to hold. And I hope that through these presentations, we can start waking up to the things that have been perpetuated over time that needs to be changed in order for us to survive on this planet, and also heal the things, not only heal the earth, heal ourselves, but heal as a collective, because we're all in this together. And then let's see, next. So this is just a kind of disclaimer, just because this is, again, based off my own experiences. And I know in the world of academics, I hate to say it, but I have definitely seen, things taken, published, and run with, and then who gets credit for that? Then we'll talk about this later. So again, we're still here. I know that's a crazy concept for some people. I've been at Chaco Canyon with our CRAT team, and we're like out there in Casa Bonita, and you still have the interpretation of, oh, the Anasazi, where did they go? And we were sitting right there. There's a group asking park rangers that, and we had Floyd. He's one of our cultural advisors. He popped out the window and he was like, I'm still here. And that's like, exactly. See, these narratives are being perpetuated even now when we are right there, but we're hidden in plain sight, because that is how it's always been since, the Indian problem. It's always been the Indian problem standing in the way of land and so-called resources ever since the beginning of conquest. And so again, like, every nation is different. Sorry. Okay. Every nation is different. The other thing that happens a lot is the homogenized idea that we are all just one umbrella. Like, we're all Indians, we're all natives, indigenous, but every indigenous group, band, tribe is different, has different culture, language, places of creation, stories. And the thing we have all in common is our connection to our environment and our ancestral homelands, the connection that we have to the natural world. Each of us, like for Hopi, it's corn. We have that relationship. It's about relationships. It's about community. It's about reciprocity, and respect. We have respect even for each other, even when tribes are war. Like when there are more warring tribes. Hopi is peaceful people, but there are tribes that war is a part of their culture, but there is the respect within it where, either gathering places or different certain times, ceremonial times, they gather in the same places. It's that respect for each other, that respect for our environment that is ingrained within our culture and the indigenous culture, and that relationship that we have to our environment and the responsibility that we have to take care of it. So, how do we get here? Who writes history? Whitewashing, gatekeeping, colonization, and conquest, right? So Victor's history, I think Dr. G would call it GWM, or Great White Man's history. It's often, male-dominated subjugation of women, people's land, and so-called resources. There's always lots of like monuments, things. Who writes it? And that's something to always look at. Like, where is this resource coming from? Why am I believing this? Like, let's start asking questions, right? Because these are old systems that have just been perpetuating over time. And I'm sorry for I don't like having just white sides. It's very hard for me. I would have loved to have put a picture of all the buffalo skulls that were how they killed off all the buffalo and stood on top of them, basically to starve Plains natives on 2 reservations because they couldn't defeat them. And that is often the other narrative that is told, right? Oh, the poor plight of the Indian. Oh, they had to go to the reservations. But really, like so we were always, again, since first contact, the Indian problem standing in the way of the land and resources. And then from my dad even just said this the other day, but I've always been taught this my whole life. Like, we were never sick. We were never poor. We had everything we need. And that's how every tribe was. They couldn't defeat us. So they went after the food sources. They went after the land. They cut down all the forests. Like, you look at the manipulation of the land coming across, and that history alone is its own ecocide, genocide. We're all tied together. The diseases that came with settlers, and we're not even talking about the weird scientific anthropology history of, the cabinets of curiosities, human basically exhibits at world's fairs, or just like it continues the bagging and tagging of our ancestors. It continues today. So these are things that are perpetuating this traumatic cycle and is not taught in school, and we continue to allow academia to perpetuate this way of thinking and doing things without any input or recognition for the original people and descendants that are still here. So that being said, I think that if I could get this thing going, sorry. Here it is. Okay. So this all goes back to basically the conflicting philosophy and religious worldviews of our different perspectives on land and so-called resources. And so in order to understand that, I'll just quickly break that down. Because in this, going to Catholic school and being a part of Hopi, and yet the concept did not really mesh together until, I saw it all laid out. So, so for a perspective that this whole conquest has been based on is this perspective of, the written doctrine, which is the Bible, or a doctrine that can travel overseas, the doctrine of discovery, for instance, or the Bible. It can travel overseas. It can be rewritten by man. It can be used to subjugate peoples and lands. And then this idea, like the constructed spaces, like churches, that are sacred as long as people gather there and congregate. But as you see all over, they can be repurposed, torn down, or, they can be abandoned. And it's always funny when the abandoned thing comes up, because we'll talk about that later. But there's separation from the natural world, and it's creating these barriers again. So what is sacred? The land, the wildlife, everything is for commodification, to be owned, controlled, and profited from a human perspective, from a material cultural perspective. Ideology of domination over nature. That is the basis. So it creates barriers, borders, and all kinds of different things as purposes to control, such as a dam to control water, siphon it up here, and based on, capitalism, or that idea of human profit off of the domination of nature, and not thinking about anything else in the greater scope. It's a very linear perspective. And let's see. I'm trying to figure out how I can do this easily without skipping to different ones. And again, graveyards, they can be also, they're marked, but also sometimes they're abandoned. I've seen historical projects done on historical graveyards, but still we respect those in the way of they can be preserved and we respect that, and like, let's document all of the, you know, headstones of the Bahanas. But when it comes to our relatives and our ancestors, if they're unmarked and just go back to the earth, then they're up for grabs to be bag tagged and put in boxes for eternity in dark spaces. So I hope that you can kind of see how this narrative has perpetuated these practices that, in my opinion, are pretty backwards, and it's time to change. Hopefully, okay. So for us as Native peoples, our perspectives, again, like every tribe has and community has different religion or different language and cultural and ties to different landscapes, but they can overlap. We also understand that our whole worldview is tied to the natural world. And without it, we're symbiotically have that relationship. They're living landscapes. These are the concepts: living landscapes, living people, living. It doesn't have to be material culture touched by man to make it sacred. Stewardship of land, not ownership over. We don't own the land. We take care of it. We're seeing now, they say the earth is waking up. It is waking up. It's showing us we are disrespecting it, as above, as below, and in all directions. That's what we think about. And we're seeing it through, you know, all these different natural disasters, to drought, to all these things, because we are destructive and we are disrespecting and we are not giving anything back. And it's that continuous relationship. It's the circle that continues. It's like karma, you know, reciprocity. It goes like this. So if we keep extracting and then we sever that relationship, where are we going to go? In Hopi, they have is a petroglyph, like it's called Bafsi Rock. I'm sure I've seen pictures of it, but it shows that of our emergence and that balance of the two worlds. And one's the Hopi way, Hopi Vewa, and the other one is this Bahana way, this other way. And they parallel for a little while, and then this way zigzags up and ends, and this continues. And we're in zigzag right now. I truly believe it, because it's, I mean, what I've witnessed in my lifetime is pretty scary to see. So I hope that we can start thinking in these more ways instead of, I don't know, instead of in that way. Oh, sorry. It's weird. I've never done before. Okay. So again, we don't see borders. We can see isolated occurrences within our cultural society, like that thing. These are search meridian across the earth. They have a purpose, and when you sever that, it will have a cause and effect. Thinking in those ways of the holistic way. So all the policy, all these basically conquest goes back to the doctrine of discovery, which is a 15th century document gay justification colonization, basically saying any European nations or that are coming across lands with like unchristianized people,
Hey, Georgie, try and cut your video out. Just turn off
so
your
we're just
video.
going to go. This
You're breaking up pretty bad.
How we take to be based on kind of perceptions, laws, pause, and then, you know, the the colonizers coming in. So they had to be more diplomatic with it. They had to make treaties to establish with tribes, because honestly, they could have just wiped them out right at that time. But it's our cultural, like in Hopi, you always are friendly and you invite someone in and you have those types of values. Very opposite from some of these European values, which I believe Columbus came and said, oh, look at these really generous, nice people. They should be easy to conquer and enslave. So that through these different perceptions of not only wilderness or lands, wilderness and native peoples, it changed over time, but it's always been considered, like we've always been, again, the Indian problem, standing in the way of land and so-called resources. And that also goes with the commodification of nature as well. So throughout, so as time, the U.S. government, everything started coming in, because first it was the Spanish that impacted us here out in the Southwest. In the East, other tribes, and every tribe has their own experience as well. Some tribes, a lot were removed. Hopi, we were very lucky. We were never removed. We never signed a treaty with the U.S. government. But there are so many broken treaties, such written doctrines that got us to where we are now. So you can see why there are archaeologists of government agencies of all the above, because of all these atrocities that have happened to us. And it's not even common knowledge to the general public. So it can be very traumatic. So this is the era of the Indian Removal Act, reservation era. A lot of tribes were moved onto reservations, out of sight, out of mind. And then this is when they were creating borders were drawn, treaties continue to be broken. And then they pretty much whitewashed all that, and we're told we disappeared and assimilated into basic history. That was always hard for me, going to like national parks back in the day and seeing, oh, the Anasazi or the ancient people, you only see pictures of the past. You only see pictures like this. You never see us in the light of this era. And that was something that always confused me growing up. So basically is the doctrines are into like the era, which was even a policy to try and even end federal responsibility for tribes. So when tribes have the federal recognition, then you have that government to government. And so, but that was also, sorry, this is not, we skipped quite a few accidents, but moving across, and then how to get the land. So how do you get the land without taking everyone out, basically? And so the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887 and the assimilation era, that was how, it was a huge land grab. It's this idea of private property. We don't see any way of that as like ownership of land, but this idea of kill the Indian, save the man. So this begins the assimilation era, which is the idea that all Native people would just, they stole children, took them away to boarding schools. So far they couldn't run away. And then, and it's very disturbing to talk about this even now, but that just came out in public knowledge pretty recently. And I've been there's a boarding school in Valentine, Arizona, right outside of Walpi. And when you go there, you can feel the sadness. Like I couldn't even get close to it. I almost threw up. Like it is heartbreaking. And then I have friends who work, in this, and they are fighting to repatriate the children who are buried outside of boarding school. It's the most heartbreaking history. many children died of broken hearts. And these are the things that aren't told. And we're still dealing with these things today. The historical trauma of that. We lost so much of our language. We lost so much of our culture because of these forced assimilations, because of the boarding school, because of the assimilation policies. And they're still happening. It's still part of even into this era. So Indian Reorganization Act, the New Deal policy. This is, so the government was like, basically, how do we become diplomatic with Native peoples? We're going to put in our own, so that's how tribal government was basically created. That created a lot of problems, especially in Hopi. That's a whole other webinar we could talk about. But they see it as a legal government, and it split even our traditional communities and contemporary. So that creates splits. It's like separation of church and state in a way, but also the separation of creating political cracks within our communities versus the cultural. And we see those even in today with the work that I do, we do on public lands or in these, it's government versus cultural. We all should have a seat at the table, but it starts getting fractioned based on these Western perceptions of ideology that have perpetuated over time. So even after that, then they termination era. That was the policy to end that federal responsibility, because that's the other thing is tribal governments, unless that's the double-edged sword. Do you sell out and start commodifying nature and figuring out ways to create industry to fund our sovereign nations? Or do we stick true to what we believe and, in the eyes of this world, be poor, run on grants, but stick to our guns? Because there is no funding really for tribal government. So that is always kind of the issues we run into. And then this Relocation Act of 1950 is a newer assimilation policy. It was a false promise of relocation. So the idea behind that was get people off the reservation. This is some of the cultural advisors I've worked with era. And I have heard first-hand experiences of this, of where they're like, oh, we have jobs for you. Come out into the city, and we have jobs and housing and all these things. And they would take them, bust them out there, drop them off in the middle of the city with nothing, and just leave them. All those false promises, relocation, broken promises again. That happened to one of the cultural advisors I had. He got taken to Seattle, and they left him. Luckily, had an alumni friend from boarding school who luckily came and got him to pick him up. But that's how we have these vast urban populations of Native people from this era of relocation, because they were left there with nothing. And then how are you supposed to get home? They had to adapt. And then now they say in the self-determination era that started with the American Indian movement finally standing up, getting it, and still not even on the main stage, I would say, until Standing Rock, more recently, 2016, finally was the first time I saw in the main public. But even then, that was censored. So it's a continuous process, even just recognition or gone, which is very crazy. But again, who gets to share the narrative? So now I just want to go into real quick, these federal policies that are to protect antiquities, right? What are antiquities, but what is worth preserving? These are amazing in the way that they finally protect these sites and places for us, like national monuments. All the work we've been doing with that is amazing now. But this is 1906. Let's think about the era that this is in. At this time, Native people weren't even considered U.S. citizens. That didn't happen until 1924. In other states like Arizona and New Mexico, I believe it's like almost in the 70s or 80s. And then it's this attempts to stop looting on public lands. From at that time, they're having things like skeleton picnics where community, like Bahana communities, would go out and just picnic and pick away all the things that are there. The other thing that needs to be understood is like that this was also created during the vanishing race ideology. So it was to preserve and remove all those things, to put them in museums for future generations. But again, from our perspectives, if you remove those things from those landscapes, then that spirit, that meaning is gone. Or like, and if you have no understanding of that, and that's what often happened with a lot of these things, is the records were not kept, and now we work in trying to put all those pieces together, and it puts a lot of work on tribal offices. And this again is a law that protected cultural resources but did not see us as human beings, and we're not a part of that narrative at all. Yeah, objects of scientific interest. That's how to prove like inferiority of the races, and then just progressed over time. Again, National Historic Preservation Act. I'm just going to say, it did all these things. We deal with mitigation. That is something in offices we deal with, but mitigation is after the fact. Like, we should have had a seat at the table in the beginning. Then you wouldn't have the problems that come down the line when they come to mitigate, if that makes sense. So again, archaeologists, land managers, historians, whoever, don't usually consult with tribes, or they come, they consult, they first section, they check the box, and then they go. And that's how it is. And until and or they say, yes, we're going to take that into consideration, what you have to say, and then never project went through anyway. So a lot of these don't hold teeth for us in the way that, because they're not understood within the perspectives of how we would like to see them applied. Again, also the Environmental Policy Act. So again, it's always isolated occurrences. Oh, this is only going to impact this area. For instance, the San Francisco Peaks. They made snow up there. Hopi has been fighting against that because it's the reclaimed water can affect that whole watershed all the way down to the Grand Canyon. And I was just up there the other day, and their whole argument is that is not going to affect any of the outside permitted areas, which is absolutely insane, because that whole watershed goes right down all aspects, Flagstaff, Grand Canyon, everywhere. And then how far does that go? And then groundwater, air. We think about this in holistic ways. That is not the way that policies are put forth. And it's not thought about as all connected. Put a dam in, see what happens. I have seen what happens. It is very destructive above river and down river to everything up the food chain. So these are the kind of ways, like, how do we start meshing these ideas? How do we start bringing them into the fold to actually support a better future? Because we're all in this together, and we all go down with the ship. So I hope that we can figure out ways to, start thinking in that holistic approach. So again, a lot of these laws don't have teeth because look, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, 1978. When I found that out, I could not believe that. I was like, we didn't get the right to practice our own religion as the original inhabitants of this country until very, very recently. So again, it recognize, but it's hard to define and protect, because from that Western perspective, all you see is, oh, that's a rock. Why do you hold that sacred? Or that's just water, because it's not material. So if I ask you this, if you had a tree gives us air, it gives us reciprocity, it gives us life. Yet has no value until it is cut down, chopped up, processed, built into a material object, structure, or whatever that has value to the Bahana eye, and then it is worth preserving, rather than life-giving things that are not, I guess. So that lack of understanding of spirituality and religion interconnectedness, the whole idea of borders, extraction, boundaries, it's all disrespect to creation and the tribe. And that's a tough one in the eyes of the law sometimes. And sometimes for us as Native people, we don't always want to share everything because it doesn't always have to be out there. So, NAGPRA. Finally, almost 100 years after the Antiquities Act, there's positive negative NAGPRA. So it finally gave us, it's a human rights law. It gave us the right to our dead and sacred objects and objects of cultural patrimony and funerary objects. It took 1990, that's within my lifetime. So this is huge for us in the way of the repatriation of, from all these things that were taken from the lands and taken to repositories, and hopefully like starting to heal that trauma. But the thing with this is the archaeological practices, it creates a lot of work for tribes and tribal offices. I worked in this, and there's a lot of processes to it. And even there's issues like tribal museums, even when it comes back to us, the process of whether it's reburial or repatriation back to the community or all of that, it's a big process and it's hard. The reburials are hard. They were never supposed to be taken in the first place. There's no songs, there's no ceremony for that. So it's often hard to get people to participate. Women shouldn't be a part of that for Hopi. And there's just a lot to it. It's that dark history that has perpetuated. This is that antiquities, boxing. And we see this a lot. I've worked in collections. We worked with this, I believe, is a Cedar King or Edge of the Cedars. But these are all living things. It's not only just living landscapes, it's living people, living objects, living things. I will continue, we'll keep moving forward, but I will tell you a story about the Price Museum. That was a Crow Canyon that I felt. Like sometimes you can go into these places and you can feel the pain. There's a book I would suggest every archaeologist, anyone read. It's called Skull Wars. And it talks a lot about the real history of archaeology and back to the material culture. Hopi is unique. We do leave these amazing footprints that are physical evidence, material evidence. A lot of other tribes may not. So for us, it's, our footprints are left through the architecture, petroglyphs, pictographs, pottery shards, and you'll see different clan migrations move those places. Like I said, they're not isolated occurrences. They're all connected. You'll often find a spring near there. You should be always looking at the greater landscape. It's not just about the material culture. When I was told that I didn't need to sketch the plants at field school, I think that's when I pretty much tuned out, because I was like, then what's the point? And we know why these things happen. So why am I listening to these narratives that are being told to me what to believe? That's what I had a hard time with. So from the Western archaeological perspective, we only see, study, or record physical evidence, like I said, of habitation, of chronological timelines. There's no understanding of even the cosmos. That is a huge part of it. from what's above to below. This whole idea of the Anasazi, the theory of the past, where did they go? Why did they abandon these places? That is the wrong question. We never abandon them. They're always living. We're still here. And the churches, on the other hand, have been abandoned. So let's start flipping that narrative. You're just playing a guessing game, honestly, in a lot of regards sometimes, in as far as like what I've seen with our culture out there and going out with tribal monitors or cultural advisors or just tribal members who have that knowledge that you can't learn in school. Because one, like what an archaeologist names maybe like some crazy name for a panel, and then you go in with the advisors, and it's almost laughable to see the stark difference. But I won't bring that, but I got lots of stories. And so these are the missing pieces of the puzzle in archaeology, in the archaeological record today. We need to stop. Let's totally just tear down the walls. Let's tear down the walls of colonialism and all these past, backwards, racist ideas and ideologies of industry and commodification of nature. I mean, look at our world now. We've gotten so far from it, of this understanding of holistic understanding. We are like literally destroying ourselves. We are funding our demise. So these are the missing pieces of the puzzle that I hope can now be added to the archaeological record. Plants, view sheds, shrines, stories, pilgrimage sites, all these things you're not going to get unless you have representation of our community members out there with you. And it's time to stop gatekeeping that and have more inclusion, because we're going to get a way bigger perspective. Like in my opinion, if you look at the puzzle and you just have the material, you only have a sliver. And find that balance within academia, within ourselves, within our healing, because it's our relationship with the landscape, not only as individuals, because that's but and personal experience with that place, with that sacred, whether it's feature or water, anything that helps perpetuate that mind, or that basically science is all about disconnection relationships, off balance bagging and tagging. So the interesting thing, I was thinking I was going to take cicada, and I was like, oh, there's been no studies of Oak Creek Canyon before, so I should maybe start doing bug studies and pin this to a board, because I had my roommate and my best friend, he did that this stuff where you pin them. But it was crazy because he would have to take the pollinators, put them in a kill jar, watch them die, and then pin them to a board. So that was really, really, really crazy to me. Whereas from the traditional ecological knowledge, we respect pollinators. They give life. They have relationships with flowers and plants. And we know that through, observation and adaptation over time. The idea that every time they say, oh, you're an expert, I'm like, no, I'm not an expert. We're never experts. That's what I've always been taught in Hopi. We're never experts. But in science, all these things they like, it's all about the expert. Everything needs to be published. Everything needs to be out there. But for us, it's about that collective, the individual experience, but also the relationships we have with the natural world, and that goes back to the oral history. It's not tangible. It's not chronological. You have to have that openness to think outside the box. It's based on that spirituality, that responsibility, and that stewardship through our covenant that we have. And if you think about it, just our sheer existence as tribal people and nations, indigenous people, we protect over 80% of the world's biodiversity by just existing, because we have held those land bases and kept those ecosystems intact. It's modern ways of conservation that are destroying ecosystems. We are seeing it all over the Southwest with grazing, with dams, with reservoirs. Like it's bad. Springs are that connection. They're sacred. They should be traditional cultural properties. These tribes want springs to be a part of the archaeological record and a value within these monuments, within these spaces. Yet that's so far off of a concept from this Bahana way of thinking that it hasn't happened yet. But that's what we are working on, or change. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, so just playing a guessing game with history. So let's start like including our community members, tribal monitors, cultural advisors in this narrative. Let's get together. And I'll tell you just a quick story. So here's TCP's traditional cultural properties, and those are things like even trails and cairns, things like that. I've been out with MPS and they think it's a modern cairn, and you turn around, they destroyed it, but it was like, sometimes they're ancient cairns, and you have to look at the relationship to the landscape. I was just out at Wapaki with one of my good Zuni friends and cultural advisors, and we were I bet there's something that, like, you have to look at the landscape and the view sheds and where it relates to that site. And also celestial. We need to protect dark skies. Why are we allowing the pollution of our dark skies? Like, for no reason, private citizens are doing that. Plants, animals, soils, minerals, these things all have power. The earth is like our body. Everything has its nutrients, it has different things, it has its purposes, and it all has to work together in order for everything to stay in balance and keep the cycle going. So, or categorizing things in boxes, material culture, separating things. And there's also a lot of people don't talk about. And maybe some of you may have experienced. I know this happens a lot. I've heard a lot of stories with river guides of things happening. And we can have another talk on that another day, but those are some things to just be aware of. You have to go out to these places visiting with respect. There are deities, there are spirits, there are things, objects you're collecting, bones. Things can follow you home. And I've heard all kinds of stories working out here in all these landscapes from friends and colleagues and people that I have worked with on things like that happening, of literally being fallen home. They will show themselves to you. And you have to be careful because it can get you sick or different ways. Having that respect and having monitors or cultural community members out there with you can help protect you and taking care of some of that stuff, working together. So if anything that we start taking out of this presentation, I hope that we can think of these places as living. We are living. We are still here. These are living landscapes. They were never abandoned. We still make pilgrimages to them. We still gather. We still take care of them in our spirit, in our prayers, and our ceremonies. In Hopi, everything's about bringing the moisture and the rain and that reciprocity and that respect, that cycle. I made a pilgrimages to the mountains recently, and I was just praying for rain because we've been in drought, and it rained, and I'm so grateful. But and that was at the headwaters in Colorado, praying for the watershed all the way down to the ocean, because that is the understanding that I have. We think of all life. Think of all life, not just us. Even with all the horrible things that have happened, it's not just about us. It's about all life. But what we're seeing is heartbreaking now because we are unhappy. We are disconnected from the environment. We're always on our phones all the time with technology. We're not looking outside the box. So I think it's necessary for the survival of all of us as a collective on this planet to stop perpetuating these old narratives and ideas of what we value and start thinking holistically and valuing the rights of nature, the life forces that give us life, without which we would not be here. So how do we start changing the narrative? Representation, reciprocity, giving back, give credit where credit's due. Do not extract. That happens a lot. Any one of our traditional or our cultural advisors could have PhDs in traditional ecological knowledge. And that did happen for me. I'm grateful, but that should be a regular thing. How do we, it doesn't have to be a published paper of academia to make you an expert, and no one is expert. We're always learning. So how do we start creating these bridges and systems that we can work collectively together to build the betterment of this discipline? Because I think there is so much benefit to what the world of anthropology and archaeology does. And these are some of the projects that I worked on where I think this is where we can start filling in those gaps and start giving back, create win-win-win situations for everyone. That's not just wins for us as humans, but win for everyone. And then creating these bridges that we can build as get our community members into manager positions, into those leadership positions in archaeology or anywhere else in land management, and taking care of these resources. So again, restoration, regeneration. And there's so many ways we can do that. Like even using the pollen samples of the pasture seeds to create new seed banks, or find the native seeds to revegetate after invasive species, those kind of things. That's how archaeology should be moving forward. Instead of being like, hey, we need to repatriate all of these metates and pollen samples, which we had to from the people. And you have that's so much work, just on track. So this is a quick, we won't show it or anything, but this is just the spring project that we did. And it was a restoration that came out of my dad. And after it was basically barely a puddle, and then remove this huge species. The other thing that came with the conquest, the colonization, and the Western expansion is invasive species, and those are impacting our environments just as in a detrimental way as well. This is it keeps switching. This is the biggest Russian olive tree I've ever seen, and it sucks up so much water. And through the removal, through the traditional practices of storing that spring, we're able to bring back the water. And this is like years ago. And that's beneficial to all the life that depended on that water, to all the life we paid for. It came back. This is the kind of restorative archaeology and anthropological practices I hope we can see going forward in the future. The inclusion of us, of these things of us in the narrative, but also to create projects that are beneficial for everyone and not keep perpetuating this traumatic cycle. And these cycles of industry, which again goes back to this idea of capitalism and what we value. So this spring restoration project it's honestly my favorite, one of my baby projects, but it takes a holistic approach. It gives back to the community. We're also, instead of extracting always, what are we giving back? What is the reciprocity that we are giving back to our communities as well? That has so much has been taken from. So that also has to go back to building lasting trust relationships, being respectful, learning to listen, all of those kind of things. These are all things I had to learn as well. So I understand. I'm just speaking from personal experience. This project also gave us the freedom to develop a model that was culturally appropriate and benefits everyone. So we also did this in restoration of a way of like not blocking water, like having the values within that traditional ecological knowledge and stewardship, and applying it to this. And we were able to restore the spring, and it's still going today. So, and again, it's a good place to start the healing because it's crazy. Things that have been done, and that will bring us back to artifacts collections, which I will just turn on really quickly. The experience, because these things again are living. When they come back, they are still living. They should not be. There's a whole protocols for taking care of tribal so-called artifacts and museum collections. Museums are their own kind of traumatic history as well. That could be another webinar, but especially if they're like something for us, like our friends or things that they're living, you can feel it. And when I walked into this museum, when we were on, I think it was it was amazing, our Crow Canyon trip, I could feel the pain, their pain. I could feel it. And I had to actually go outside and, pray. And I actually sobbed. I sobbed for a minute, and I had to make an offering to them and just let them know, I'm here to do what I can to try and help people understand. And that eased me a little bit, but I could still feel it in my soul. And it wasn't until we were in the room looking at some collections, and I kind of just like I know those things were sacred objects, and I know that those things are placed out on those landscapes for a reason. They're with prayer, with a spirit. They're never supposed to leave that place. They're never supposed to be preserved necessarily. We don't see everything as having to be preserved. It can go back to the earth. That's that cycle. We go back to the earth, we come back as moisture. When we take these things, when we remove them, you're severing again those ties again. But putting them, wrapping it in plastic, storing them in dark places like that, I could feel there's the soul hurting. And I think I was like 1 foot out the door because I wasn't sure if I was gonna like be able to handle it. And then they asked me, "What do you think, Georgie?" That I started talking kind of about that stuff, and I could feel the pain easing. And that really showed me that this work is so important that I need to keep doing this, whether it's on like archaeology to museums to conservation. How are we going to start thinking of these things holistically? How are we going to start changing the narrative? It's about time. Like, it's more than about time. So I hope the path going forward, we find that balance, right? Because again, the earth is like our bodies. We are connected. Everything has an effect and reaction. You look at this, like the veins, right? Your veins. They say water, when you put a dam, like a cement dam, you're severing the veins of the earth. The flow, there's all kinds of problems up and down. I've definitely seen it. We can have another webinar on that later. But I just hope that we start thinking in those relationships of we are a part of other and we are in this together. So again, can give back through, having representation, supporting tribal museums. Check out our Hopi Vewa website, for Hopi by Hopi. So when those things come back, we can have a place to take care of them in that traditional way, how they're supposed to be taken care of. Each tribe has their own way of taking care of these things that were never should have been taken in the first place. And let's start to place value on the nature and the natural processes that give us life. The pollinators' relationship with the plants. Let's get rid of grazing. Like, why are we still grazing? Cattle are horrible for the environment on so many levels. There's other ways of rethinking this, of doing in land management, and that is happening. It's working with tribes. So I think archaeology is starting to get there, but we need to keep going. And for instance, so here's just some just advice. Partnerships, collaboration, and consultation are dependent on building lasting trust relationships and based on respect and reciprocity. That means don't go consult, check the box, and then ghost, or publish the information. It's best to meet face to face, confidentiality is a huge one. Find common values, and consultation does not mean consent. It's best to listen and learn. And be sure to give credit where credit is due. Every tribe is different, but everyone likes to eat. And we can always have importance in partnerships, because you're going to get such a bigger picture. You only have a sliver. I'm playing a guessing game at this point. But like when you have tribal monitors, Hopi, we leave a trace. Other tribes don't. I've been out with Apache and archaeologists in intertribal monitoring, and archaeologists walked right through a huge Apache site. And that's all based on watersheds, viewsheds, plants, animal, like how things are laid out in that landscape. You can't see that with a trained archaeological eye that just looks for material culture. And this is all of our responsibility. Taking the care of this earth is all of our responsibility. And we all go down with it. We all go down together. So as a collective society and as individuals, if the earth is sick, we will be sick. We are all a part of it, and we're all in this together. So I hope that we can start thinking from the archaeological record to all the way up about what is really worth preserving for the future. Do we need to really keep collecting pottery sherds and like our ancestors and spiritual objects to put in museums to be there for a while until we have to get them and deal with the whole NAGPRA process? And it's just this big cycle that takes a lot of work and energy from our side. And rather than, why don't we start fighting to preserve the trees that give us air, or the water that gives us life, or the groundwater? Like, let's have that understanding of that holistic perspective. Or the springs that every single like site you're going to find out there in habitation is probably near water or springs. These are the things that we should start preserving and thinking about. It doesn't have to be material culture. It doesn't have to be touched by man, manipulated by man, and basically destroyed in order for it to be sacred. I mean, sacred and preserved. I really hope we can start thinking in that way. Because now is the time for healing, and it's a new direction must be taken. So the signs are all around us, and it holds, the natural world holds the answers. This is after we did a stewardship trip. One of the last projects up in Escalante designed is working to keep cattle out and fence a spring to protect that riparian zone from them. And because they are very destructive, and it was positive, again, a win-win-win. We had Hopi youth, we gave them skills and stewarding, building bridges. And when we returned, I mean, it gives me chills just thinking about, we returned to this. This is us going back into Hopi, and it poured. It hadn't poured that whole time, and then it poured after that project. And I had participants who said, they had lost hope, and then these things give them hope. So it's all there. We're here. The signs are here. I hope we can start making the light in the darkness, because it's survival 101. All of the money, material won't save you in the world if we don't have clean water, clean air, ecosystems, and should be valuing and preserving. So I hope that through this presentation, I know it was long. Thanks for bearing with me. And I just hope that you have a new understanding of how to look at this. We can get into the nitty-gritty history later, but I hope that you go out in positive thoughts and minds, and we start looking at what we truly value and making those changes to right those wrongs and begin that healing. So, Asquili. Bye, Pasa.
Georgie, thank you so much. I really want to take a second and just honor the huge amount of work that you put into this presentation, all of the important education about colonial history and atrocities, your personal experience all the way from childhood through school and your first jobs and the work you're doing now. I'm just really deeply honored at how much work you put into this and how much of yourself that you shared for all of us. So, and there's a lot of gratitude coming in the chat with everyone. So, Georgie, thank you. This was huge.
Yeah, and honestly, if my contact info's there, I'm happy. If anyone wants to reach out or needs consulting services or questions, please don't feel free to reach out.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to. We're a bit over time, so I want to be respectful of your time and our viewers' time, and let you go. But I will. We have your contact information. No, don't feel bad. It was absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. Just so content rich and such an important education. And you're such an amazing educator. Real quick, you recommended a book at some point in here, and there's been questions coming in about which one you recommended. Do you remember that?
Yes, it's called, actually I have it right here. It's called Skull War. Okay. Skull Wars. Can you see it?
No, but just you can we'll go ahead and pop that in the chat. Skull Wars, we can look that up. Yeah, absolutely. But everybody has been weighing in about your passion and your knowledge about this. It is really inspiring. And I'm really glad that we have this recorded and it'll be on YouTube. I think a lot of us might want to go back and watch it again with all of the rich content. Oh, yep, we've got a link in the chat for that book. So, Georgie, we will definitely be hearing more from you. Thank you for all the thought that you put into this presentation, and go have a good, wonderful, well-deserved rest this evening. Thank you so much.
Oh, I will, but it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for everything. And yes, Crow Canyon is always a special place in my heart and always an honor to work with you guys. So thank you.
And yeah, we feel exactly the same way about you. Have a wonderful evening and we will see you soon. And thank you all for watching.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
see if I can exit.